tell you one thing that's really annoyed me today. Tesco, I couldn't find eggs for about half an hour.
Right, okay.
Literally just walking around Tesco going, where the bloody hell are these eggs?
Were they in the egg section?
But there's no specific egg section. Where it says eggs. By the bread aisle. You would expect a sign going, eggs. I was properly lost.
So, Will, you know how at the start of the podcast, the introduction is just me and you talking about something completely unrelated?
Yeah.
It's good. That's going to be it. Right, should we get on with this?
Yes, let's go.
Alright, okay. Try and do this first time. Hello and welcome to Something Near the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. I'm James.
And I'm Will.
And today, we're going to be having a chat.
I'm not going to say it again.
I was waiting for that. Okay, well, I'll say it. Today we're going to be having a chat again. Round 5. Yeah, this one's probably the biggest news week.
It's been mad, but not in terms of politics mad, if you get me. It's society.
British politics have been quiet. It's more across the ocean. But sticking with tradition, we'll start with Britain. So last week, we talked about Dominic Cummings. Surprise, surprise. He was all people were concerned about. And this week, we're going to revisit that, do a bit of a review, simply because neither Will or I are reactionary journalists. So I especially struggled to watch the Dominic Cummings interview and then be critical of it, because when he did his press conference, I kind of just listened to everything he said and nodded along, simply because it all made sense. And yeah, I kind of understand it. But then a week later, holes started to form and people have sort of picked it apart a bit. And so we're just going to revisit that slightly more rounded opinion now. Is that a good way of saying it, Will?
Yeah, it's a good way. And I think we can talk about like the impact it's had on lockdown since. We'll start with his speech and we'll see the things that we disagree on, agree on, all sort of the holes in his story that have been picked by everyone else that you've heard over the week. And now we've just jumped on the bandwagon about 2 days too late. The big things I picked up on, so his wife developed symptoms. So he went home, as he should do, because the rules were, if anyone developed symptoms of coronavirus, you must stay inside for 7 or 14 days, wasn't it? So he goes back, and a day later he goes back to work for 2 days, bearing in mind he's been exposed to coronavirus at work as well. Another big thing is he says he's never been tested. And I would have thought the man at the heart of government surely would have been tested, because everyone else was. You then expose your child, but you put them in the car, your child, with someone, and drive 4 hours without a stop to a different house. I don't know how you can do a 500-mile round trip without stopping for fuel, unless there's like a refuel on the go system that we don't know about.
Well, some cars are capable of 500 miles on one tank. It's simply that he'd have to have left London with a full tank, and not just sort of suddenly jumped into his car.
Hasn't he got a Land Rover Discovery or something like that?
Land Rover Discovery Sport. I am currently Googling the fuel tank capacity and then the MPG, and we'll do the math. So carry on talking, Will.
If it's more than 520 miles, then fair play. But James, I'm going to finish off with a rhetorical question. Would you ever drive with your 4-year-old child and your wife in the car to test your eyesight? And would you drive 50 miles on your wife's birthday during lockdown?
Well, that's a good point, because surely if he was staying in an outbuilding and he wanted to test his eyesight and he thought the best way of doing that, which is sketchy anyway, but we'll go past that, would be to go for a quick drive. What was to stop him from saying, hey, wife and child, why don't you just stay in the house? I'll whiz just up and down the road, 5 or 10 minutes, not 30 miles.
Right. He could have driven for 5 or 10 minutes, not to Barnard Castle, on his wife's birthday.
But then again, Cummings doesn't really strike me as a man of romance, so it purely could just be a coincidence.
It's a 60-mile round trip.
I've done the maths on the car, and it is highly likely it could do it on one tank. If he's got a diesel 2-litre Discovery Sport, which is the most common engine, he'd need a 60-litre fuel tank to complete the journey. And cars of that size usually have between 60 and 100-litre fuel tanks. So he could have done it. So just that's a little interruption for you there. But yeah, but more importantly, it is that is a huge hole in the logic. I wanted to check if I was safe to drive my wife and child, so I drove my wife and child.
So we had the 520 miles, but then we also had the 60-mile round trip in.
God,
that's 580 miles.
Yeah, that's right. So 580 divided by 38, which is the size of which is the MPG a car like that gets. I've just Googled it. So that you end up with 15. You times that by 4.5 because that's litres, and you end up with 68.7. So you need a 70-litre fuel tank basically to do it. So again, still possible, but it's getting sketchy. He'd have to have left London with a full fuel tank.
When his wife's already been exposed to coronavirus.
Yeah, I mean, this is not looking good, Dom.
It's not looking very good.
And why has he got a full fuel tank if he's not been driving around since lockdown? Because surely, lockdown's announced, you stop driving and your car just has a full tank of fuel? How's that work? Like, most people's fuel tanks are about half full because, most of the time you've not just filled it up.
I would say when lockdown started, mine was fuel because I thought there was going to be a run on fuel.
So. Will, you should have waited when oil prices dropped.
I know.
Because there was quite the opposite of a run on fuel.
No, it was that week before when everyone's panicking about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Is anything going to be open? Blah, blah, blah. So that's why I did it. So what do you think the implications of this Dominic Cummings thing has had on lockdown as it is?
Well, I was going to talk more about the implications on the Conservative government as opposed to just lockdown in itself, because this is something that they had, they delivered Brexit. At the start of this, Boris was the coronavirus saviour. He was protecting everyone. Rishi Sunak unleashed the furlough scheme and everybody was protected and wrapped in cotton wool and it was all beautiful. Now, we are the second worst affected country in the world, deaths-wise. I know all countries are different, blah, 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 but that's still a big thing to have happened, right? We are the worst in the world. We're the second worst in the world. We're not the second biggest country in the world. And then you've also got this thing with Dominic Cummings and everything's starting to fall down. So they will now, I know it's a long time away, but politics is politics. Anything can happen in 4.5 years. They've now got a huge upward battle to regain the public trust.
They do.
Whilst this is obviously very bad for them short term, they have just lost a lot of trust and many voters feel like they've been lied to or treated as though they were stupid or even just sort of let down. You might not believe the government are lying to you, but the whole idea of they seem to be caring more about one singular advisor than they have done about anything else over this. The whole hoo-ha this is created just to protect Dominic Cummings, and yet they're struggling to protect care homes. I know it's a completely different factor, but it in the eye of the public, it doesn't look good.
I agree with you on this. I think that they've burned all their political capital now, and it shows that they're willing to play politics at the time when it's worse to play politics.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Will.
And I think you looked even more stupid today when I think it was one of the Labour whips had also broken lockdown and she's resigned straight away and apologised for the situation. Yet the Conservatives are still debating and fighting about this issue, whereas Labour have packed up, got on with it, moved on. I know it's only a chief whip and it's not someone who's directing the whole policy on coronavirus, but still. And then I think for the Conservatives, I think it's quite lucky that it's come only 6 months into the Conservatives majority. And I think that you have 4 years to try and put this past you as much as you can. Whereas if an election was, say, 6 months away or a year away, I still would have thought you are completely screwed at the moment.
I think the Conservative Party in itself is now... Well, the thing is that they were going to be the party of kind of post-Brexit. They were claiming this was to unleash Britain's potential. And in steady economic times, they could have sort of played it off as a dip before an age of prosperity. And, they were going to level up the north and something I'll talk about later, invest, and really help bring Britain up to being a world-leading power that it once was and that they believe it can be again. But now this whole debacle, I'm going to call it, has meant that this government and this parliament, its singular job will be to get things back to how they were.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to be a bit like Donald Trump in 2016. His job was just to keep things going well, right? Whereas in this government, and that's what this government wanted to do, but their job is now a bit like the Cameron government, is to rescue things from within ruin, right? And so that could play into their hands just because the Conservative Party is usually one that's trusted with the economy. You know, they are seen as the party of kind of like fiscal and economic and budgetary responsibility, etc., etc., etc. So, 2024, December, Fixed Term Parliament Act, thanks for that, December election yet again.
I don't think they'll do it in December again.
Well,
we can't have it in December. I think they'll go, maybe it'll be 4 years in May and restore that back to normal.
Okay, yeah. The point with that is that people might not take a risk, and that's risk in quotation marks with Labour, it's because they'll sort of default to the whole idea of Conservatives economy, right? If that makes sense. But then again, they've kind of lost a lot of the idea of competence and strong government just from how they've been, right? So the Conservatives in general, the idea of conservatism is known for being good with the economy, but this Conservative government itself isn't known for being capable.
Where they're also going wrong as well is they're trying desperately to take everyone's eye away from Dominic Cummings when they're easing lockdown. So now you can see 6 people, and now the people who were protected, who had to stay inside at all costs for 12 weeks, can now go on a stroll. And it's been called a PR stunt by even people like the Mail. I think even they're turning on them now because it just looks like a publicity stunt, and we're not actually at that stage yet where it is safe. We still have, I think it's the highest or second highest death toll in Europe.
Yep, and we have one of the highest reproduction rates still of new cases.
Yeah, exactly. And we are reopening fast.
I might as well get it out of the way now. My worst sort of news article of the week was just the fact that the government were playing politics with coronavirus. And it's more of just the Dominic Cummings thing, where we're defending him despite supposedly breaking the rules. The politics is more about the media, right? So they're trying to play the media to cover up Dominic Cummings, and the way they do that is release the people from the lockdown. So now I could have 5 friends in my garden, all 2 meters apart, which shouldn't be a risk. But I mean, some people won't have gardens big enough to have 6 people in, but they'll still do it anyway. And with the vulnerable people, they're allowed out, which is great. Finally get some, fresh air and a bit of exercise. But it just feels like it's taking more and more risks and releasing the lockdown and getting things going in order to fill the headlines with stuff where it's positive about the government. So the government lets people go out now rather than, the government continually keeping Dominic Cummings. So it just feels like they're trying to play politics at the worst possible time. Well, the way they're doing it's not just media spin, it's kind of just creating policy that to do with coronavirus, which obviously is very dangerous. So they're creating policy that could be dangerous just to kind of save themselves.
In my eyes, they announced the end of lockdown, and in many other people's eyes, on last Monday, when Dominic Cummings was kept in a job and every cabinet minister went to defend him. Because I think now we see people like, yeah, but if the government are doing it and breaking lockdown rules, then I can as well. Like we see the pictures at Durdle Door, Bournemouth Beach, Brighton Beach, loads of people going out now. And social distancing is then on night now and impossible and more than likely not happening. I've noticed a lot more people out on the roads as well, and just thinking it's now the end of lockdown. One of the scientific advisors said it was now a very dangerous moment. And I found it interesting how Whitty and Valance did not go to a single press conference where they were defending Cummings.
Apparently they refused to do it, which speaks volumes, just because if they did defend him, right, regardless of whether they believed he broke the rules or not, they knew that it would have negative impact.
We've had such a drastic change as well, from the politicians listening to the scientists to then politicians making the rules for the scientists. We've had people say it's still not safe to send kids to school like we have done today, but the politicians say, no, it's safe, it's perfectly safe, we should go in.
Yeah, I think another thing you get is that it's no longer following the science, but it's kind of like regarding it. So we've listened to the science and then we've decided this, rather than the science told us to do this, right? Yeah. So it's a little change in tone there. It might sound subtle, but it's very important, because instead of, it's more of like, guidance. So it's, you should probably do this, rather than you have to do this, right?
And then also them peddling still, it's British common sense you must listen to. That's what you have to do. Right? It's like when they say use your common sense or use your instincts, they push the blame again. It's not on them. It's not their fault. It's the British people's fault if we have a further 20,000 people die, when they are the ones that have eased lockdown arguably far too quickly and have virtually announced the end of lockdown by not taking any action on Dominic Cummings. I think where people's anger has again arisen is because if me or you broke the rules, we would be held to account. We would be fined or face the consequences for our actions. He hasn't. That's where I think a lot of the anger has come from as well.
Another thing I was going to point out is that this isn't a decision that's been taken lightly by the government. Boris Johnson was furious, apparently, with Dominic Cummings, and this was not action that they really wanted to take. So it's kind of like, it's almost even worse that this isn't something that they are 100% invested in, because they've decided to do it and to keep Cummings and to defend him, right? They felt they had to do it, but it's not something that they really, really wanted to do. It's not like the ideal scenario to keep him. And so the amount of tension in number 10 has been reported to be varying levels. Some sources say very high, other sources say that it's being overblown. Make of that what you will. One report that I thought was quite interesting was, this is Tim Shipman, Sunday Times. By Friday, the atmosphere was so febrile, MPs were sharing rumours in their WhatsApp groups that Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, had punched Cummings in a fight broken up by Michael Gove, a claim variously dismissed as not true, completely invented and total bollocks by senior figures. So I'm likely to believe the senior figures here that there probably wasn't a fight, but that would be a spectacle to see.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall to watch that.
And but, it's not even seeing Dominic Cummings being hit, but more Michael Gove breaking up a fight would have just been brilliant.
But it again plays into the whole issue of, why isn't he gone then? If they say a lot of the cabinet are furious with him, why isn't he gone?
They're too far in it now to get rid of him, right?
They
which is one point, but it's also that if there is the amount of aggravation that this has caused proves how dependent the government seems to be on Dominic Cummings, or at least how
afraid of him they are.
Allied with them they are, or afraid. You're right. So it's not that they really wanted to do it, but they had to, because if they really wanted to do it, then there wouldn't have been all this aggravation. It does make it worse, because then they are playing politics, as I was saying earlier, risking a second peak by easing the lockdown to try and cover up the headlines. But it's not even like it's something that they were fully invested in, but more something they felt was almost unavoidable.
But the thing is, they're not just playing with like their own reputation, they're playing with people's lives, which is the scary thing about it. Was we could risk thousands more deaths just because we want to save Boris Johnson's political reputation.
But let's hope that is not the case. Let's hope that this easing of the lockdown maintains a sensible, reasonable state of people staying distanced, not abusing the rules. I think it's the whole idea of giving an inch and taking a mile, and the more inches you get, the more miles people are going to take, if that kind of makes sense. So you can do this and that is it. Less loopholes there, whereas in now, right, I can have 6 people in my garden. Who's to stop, who's to say that we're not going to just end up, even if it's just for a brief moment, getting close to each other and passing the virus on, right? And so it's like, if someone needs to use the toilet and they don't properly disinfect the taps or the handles on the doors, or if I'm just briefly handing a plate of food over because you can have barbecues, and I can think, oh, it's fine, it's arm's length, it's just a second, but if you come within the 2 meters, or I've touched that plate, I've not washed my hands recently, I've just, wiped my face or whatever it might be, scratched an itch. It's tiny things like that. And because you're giving people more and more freedom, even if they don't realise that they are putting themselves at more risk, it's just highly possible to happen.
If you had a child, would you send them to school? Because they're going back to school.
Well, it would depend on, obviously, my job, my partner's job, availability. I think it's difficult to me to say hypothetically whether I would send a child in or not. Do I feel that schools are safe? Obviously, we know that teachers, they are naturally very caring people, or else they wouldn't be in the job if they didn't like, looking after and helping children, especially, younger children. And so I believe that, as many precautions as possible will be taken, but you can't really expect 4 and 5-year-olds to socially distance. And as much as they can, sit them all on separate desks, etc., 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 and have them in many different classrooms.
If the school had told me all the measures they put in place, how they're going to administer it, and it's very well organised, I'd entertain the possibility. But I can perfectly see why parents don't want their children to go into school. But if I was in your position, I'd go into school.
Yeah, I'm going into school as soon as I can. But from a parental perspective, I don't know. I think the issue with the whole schools thing, it's not would you keep your child at home, but can you? Some parents are really struggling with this whole home working, or if they can't work from home, then you're even less likely to be able to keep your child, because if you have to go to work, you're one of those industries where you can't work from a home office, even if it's just at your kitchen table, then you're more likely to have to send them to school. And it plays back into the fact that the idea that the people who are going to be hardest hit by this virus are probably the people who are least well off in society in the first place, because they'll be the first to go back to work, because the policy now is, can you work from home? No, we'll go to work then, right? So everybody who can work from home because they've got lovely little office jobs, still going to get paid, and they'll still work from the safety of their own home, and they can keep their kids at home, so they're not going to pick up the virus. The people who have to go out are going to be more exposed themselves. Their kids are going to be more exposed, which it's a bit of a vicious circle, really. And I don't know what the solution could be. But I think it's very much more of a can you, not would you? Do you have the ability to be more precautious rather than do you want to? So yeah.
So would you say that's a wrap for our coronavirus news today?
One more thing I was going to add is just that I've seen so many people breaking the lockdown rules. Now, up until today, the policy was you can go for a walk with a friend of yours or family member, whatever it might be, he's not in your household, as long as you are 2 meters apart. So I've done this 3 times since we were given our new freedom, and it's been very nice. But at the same time, areas we've been to, we've seen literally huddles of people just in a group, drinking, whatever it might be, not distanced. Even if they were distanced, they'd be breaking the rules, but they weren't distanced at all. And so I don't get, one, they're in public, so it's not like they're trying to hide it. What goes through your mind when you do that? I've no idea. And then seeing people online, hugging friends and then putting it on social media. I did tweet about it because it was really annoying me.
I did see your tweet.
There's one thing breaking the lockdown rules, but you've got to be really thick to then show everybody how much of a knob you're being. It's like, what are you trying to achieve? Oh, look, I've broken the rules. Aren't I cool? What? I don't get it. It blows my mind. But so I don't get what goes through your head when you think, yeah, I'm going to break the rules and just sit in a huddle in public or hug my friends and put it online. Just stick to the rules. They're there for your own good. They're there for society's good. Be nice. Have some respect for other people. Have some respect for yourself and your family who you're putting at risk. It's like dominoes, right? You'll see if you could be a domino in a chain. If I take you out because you've not gone and hugged your friends, you'll stop the rest of the line from falling over, which could, save lives. That's the whole point of all of this. We're not social distancing just so nobody gets ill. We're social distancing so people don't die. You're getting complacent. And I know lots of people are saying, I want to meet my friends. It's good for your mental health. Fair enough. Just don't hug your friends. Stay 2 meters apart. That's it. That's all you need to do.
Should we take a break?
Yeah. Oh, well, we're not even halfway through yet, Will. So, but then again, the next issue we're going to tackle is quite big as well.
But then we've got our 3 other stories.
Yeah, let's go for a break.
I'm saying we take our break because if we talk George Floyd now, we're going to be here for another hour.
Good idea, Will. We've finished Dominic Cummings. We're going on to George Floyd's death and the protests. But we're going to take a break now. If you're not going to listen to this all the way through, here's a good time to pause. If you are, why not grab yourself a coffee, a drink, a digestive biscuit. You might actually need some fairly strong alcohol for what we're going to tackle next, just because it's so complicated and mind-boggling. So
depressing.
Tequila, port, brandy, whatever you want, give it a go. Yeah.
Turn my mic off today.
What I'm trying to say is we're gonna have a break now. Why don't you have a break too? See you later. Oh, right. There we are. That was very waffly. Are you gone, Will? I think you might be gone. Ooh.
I'll go to the toilet.
Okay, see ya.
Phone.
Will, I'm here if you are.
Boom!
Hello.
Back again.
Yeah, so I'm just getting few bits together, some newspaper articles to get up without rustling whilst we're properly podcasting.
Screen share at the moment because I can see your screen.
Can you? Wait, what can you see? Can you just see William Turner?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Apparently we are screen sharing. There we are. How about that? Okay, that's actually quite useful for future in case we need to show each other some articles. Good job. Everything was all above board as always on my pristine laptop.
Dodgy stuff on there.
Nothing at all, Bill. Nothing at all. Genuinely, all you'll find on my laptop is versions of this podcast, and then bits I've downloaded from YouTube to make silly little sing-songs. Anyway, so during my break, I got myself a glass of ice, a can of Coke, some nuts, some strawberries, and a litre of squash. How about you?
I've got nothing. I feel inferior now. I'll go get some digestives and a Pepsi. I went to the toilet.
A little bit of ASMR. Right, you ready? You got to do that one with your Pepsi then.
Do you want to time me?
I mean, I can do.
I'll do it under a minute.
Okay, 1 second. Right, go.
Let's start.
Right, sounds like Will's just fallen over. So, for everybody else there. That was me pouring my Coke. Sounds quite nice, doesn't it? Should we have round two? So, whilst Will's gone, I'll just chat to you. Basically, because of the whole podcast thing, my bedroom's got to be as soundproof as possible. And all I can really do to help that is close my window and shut my door. But my bedroom's at the back of the house. Well, that was 50 seconds, so well done. I was just chatting to the listeners there. So I was just saying how, because my bedroom's at the back of the house and it's therefore south facing, the sun comes beating in through my window, and so I end up just living in a little oven whilst we podcast this. So hence why I've got a glass of ice with a bit of Coke in it, because I just need to cool down. Speaking of, nice, Will. Sorry I interrupted you there. You're cracking the can. Pour it into the glass for some ASMR.
I've got no glass. Alright, let's do it.
So I hope you all enjoyed your break. You've got some wonderful snacks, I hope. Look, that's my Coke and ice.
Quavers.
And you got quavers, did you say?
I
thought you were getting digestives.
I've got digestives as well.
Wow, that was quick. Doing both.
I'm speedy.
Are the quavers in the same area as the biscuits, or was that a separate journey?
No, they're in a separate.
Wow.
I got into trouble though.
For running around the house. I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm with my nuts and strawberries and Coke and squash. So all should be good for the second half of the podcast. I do love strawberries. Probably best and most respectful to stop eating whilst we're tackling this rather difficult subject. Although I think drinking is permitted. So, Will, second half of the podcast, we're back from the break. Potentially the biggest issue we've tackled so far on here. What happened in America and what have been the consequences of that?
So, last week, pretty much while we were recording the podcast, footage emerged of a man, George Floyd, an African-American, who was, I think we can say, murdered by the police. He had footage of police officer Derek Chauvin with his knee on his neck because apparently he resisted arrest, and it's highlighted that more police brutality and treatment of African Americans, which by the way is not a new thing, it's been going on for decades upon decades. The things we're about to say we have no real experience of.
No.
But we do a lot of reading.
Yes, we do a lot of reading, exactly.
And we can try and put ourselves there. So
we can discuss the issues as we see them, because that's what the podcast is our view, our take on things. Now, we're not claiming to be the most authoritative source on everything, but it's just it's just us talking about what we see.
I think it's fair to say we felt physically ill after seeing. I'm taking you've seen the video as well. We felt sick, angry, but my anger came from it's happened again.
The thing with it is it's an issue that should be something in the past.
Yeah.
right? And not that it should ever have occurred, but obviously, as we know, history of African Americans in America itself. I mean, the name African Americans because they were slaves imported from Africa to be sold as property and then used for work, right? And so an important point that I'd like to bring up, and something I've only just really learned about today, is that a woman rang up onto a radio station and said there's never been a full denunciation of slavery, because once Black Americans were slaves and then they were given freedom, but then certain laws were slowly introduced, and so they were freed from slavery to become sharecroppers, and then the Jim Crow laws were introduced. And so in America, what had happened is there was a very slow progression away from slavery, but there was never a line drawn and then that is the past and this is now. Instead, it's been an evolution. And so what that means is that there's never truly been freedom for Black Americans in America, right? Whilst they are legally free, societally, these things still overshadow. And so
just because the laws have changed over time, it doesn't change people's attitudes, it doesn't change traditions.
Instead of being freed, it was just a relaxing of the restrictions. And because of that, it's never been tackled.
So the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery, the 14th Amendment, equal rights for all in the United States, and the 15th Amendment, voting rights. But then you had Andrew Johnson, president after Lincoln was killed, and he introduced stuff like the Black Codes, which then became Jim Crow laws, which started to erode freedoms away from African Americans again. At the time, there was great opportunity for equality in the future, but it was wasted by then, and then that's gone on from generation to generation.
I think it's got to the point where it's, you talk about institutionalized racism. I think it's so ingrained into the society, especially
it's still there. It's not as formalised as in Jim Crow, but it's still there.
Exactly.
And it may not be publicised everywhere, but you scratch the surface and it's definitely still there.
Yeah,
as can be seen in this.
And so I think there is there are people who are consciously racist and then subconsciously racist, and so in a sense, or prejudiced is maybe a way to put it. Just because you can claim I'm not a racist person, however, it's the subtle nuances. And so you might not realize it, but you can be subconsciously prejudiced. And so I think that's a big issue in America, as it is globally, for minority races. But it's highlighted through all the social justice issues over there. And this is like tensions been building and building and building. So this is what's erupted with the riots and the protests out there and all the violence and anger that's being shown. And so we're here to talk about the violence and anger rather than try and, diagnose the history of institutionalized racism in the US, because that's quite a big issue that Will and I are not qualified to tackle.
Or nowhere near qualified to talk about.
We are just here to discuss what's been going on and give a bit of an opinion on it, because that's what this is. This is an opinion-based podcast. We aren't a news podcast, right? As everybody should know by now, the death of George Floyd triggered riots and protests in the US. Now, Will, if you wouldn't mind, talk about the protests and then what's your take on them?
I think it's been brewing for months and months now. We see the shooting of an unarmed black man with Ahmaud Avery, and then you had the Amy Cooper incident in Central Park with the woman who calls the police saying a black man's attacking her, which is all caught on film. And then you have all the things that have been going on with the lockdown as well. And I think it created a perfect spark for what's happened now. And I totally get why this has turned into a violent protest, because for decades, African Americans have been treated with violence by the police and in everyday society. And it's like what Martin Luther King said, the language of a riot is the language of the unheard. And I think for ages now, we've just not had a proper conversation about it. So I do get why there has been violence to get the message out there. However, it's not what I would have done personally, because I think I wouldn't have used a violent protest. I wouldn't have any other looting. By the way, the people that are looting are not protesters. They've just literally hijacked the situation to give them an excuse. However, I wouldn't have used a violent protest, as it plays into people like Trump and the Republicans' hands who want to keep the status quo. It plays into their hands even more, because they can argue they're undermining American values, and Trump's now got an enemy that he can attack in the form of Antifa. But I think if you'd used a non-violent protest and got the message out there, it doesn't give Trump that ability to attack protesters in the way that he's done, because will undoubtedly embolden his base. I was watching just before we came on air an American live radio show about sport, but he talks about current events in America. And he said in the early part of the week and up to the weekend, there was a big point in unity across the whole of America about now is the time for change. But the looting has taken away those moderates that have now woken up to the issue, has now taken them away again. And I feel that it's not an opportunity missed yet. We still have, because now we've got the whole world talking about this issue. Now is the time to have a big, proper discussion into police brutality and the treatment of African Americans all around the world and our relationship with race. However, violence just turns those moderates away so that change will be further put away. The media focus on the riots and the looting, whereas what I want to see in the news is more scenes like, have you seen this in Michigan? In Flint, Michigan, the police sheriff, Chris Swanson, takes off his riot gear, puts his baton down and says, I want to join you guys. These guys here love you and want to protect you and want your voices to be heard. And he joins in with the protest. And that's something that's been doing the rounds, but it hasn't got as much media coverage as the riots.
I think what the riots do is they give people a reason to reject the movement, right? And so you can say, This is violent, it's damaging. It takes away from protests, and violent protests I can understand. But when it comes to going, like I've seen footage of literally hordes of people running into a Nike store, which has been, the front window has been smashed, and just running out with armfuls of clothes. Now, Nike have spoken out so much about black and racial issues. And so
they had a whole Colin Kaepernick campaign about Colin Kaepernick was the guy who knelt during the national anthem. And now, as a result of that, he can't get a job in the National Football League, American football. And that has been a massive talking point in America.
Well, and so it's just like, I could understand, if you want the police, right? That in front of me is a picture of a police car on fire. Now, at no point am I saying, why not go out and set fire to a police car? But that's a sort of violent protest that's understandable, right? The police are the people who sparked this issue with the murdering of George Floyd. And so by rejecting that and sort of protesting by setting fire to a police car, that's understandable and it makes sense. Looting a shop from a company who fight for the same issues as you is just opportunistic crime.
They're not protesters. Let's just put it out there.
But that's the point. But they're under the mask of protesting, right? And
but they are blamed as the protesters,
and it detracts away from it, or even just smashing up shops in general, right? You might not be stealing, but if you go down a street and you smash up a load of shop fronts and destroy everything inside it because you're so angry and you want to show, look, this is all the anger, this is how emotional we feel about this. This is a city that is a huge sector of the population, and all the businesses owned are from black people, and so the chances are you're destroying the livelihood in an already very complex time of somebody who is on your side. And so that's where I think the difference between the protesting and just the violent rioting is really got to be understood, right? And I think there's a clip from 1992 when there was riots going on in the US of a black guy shouting at a lot of protesters about, why are you doing this to me? I'm not the problem, because his business had been destroyed. And I will put that in because it's really emotive, and it kind of points out the issue with these riots here, because it's more than just a violent protest. It's like it's almost uncontrollable damage.
Like we've seen it before, how violence doesn't really enforce the change that we desperately want to see, because nothing's changed. We're still talking about this right now. We need to find a different way. There needs to be another way to protest, so you don't give people like Trump the ammunition and the weapons he can to draw battle lines, to embolden his base and to alienate people.
Gives people a cause to hate on the movement, and it's just the movement that will be trying to, that will also be campaigning to push Trump out of office. And so you're kind of, it's almost working against itself, right? And another thing I was going to say, it detracts away from all the good protesting that there's been, and then the heartwarming things. And I've seen videos and footage all over the internet of violent interactions between protesters and the police, which in itself doesn't help heal any wounds. You'll always see the most extreme cases. That's just what's going to go viral on the internet, because it's been getting so out of hand. And I think there's so much anger and tension and adrenaline running around. Both sides are reacting in really extreme ways. But all of that takes away from the good side of this protest and movement. So there's people dancing in a socially distant way in the streets, and police officers taking a knee shoulder to shoulder with black protesters, right? And so not only does it make you look bad, but it takes away from the good, and then gives people like Donald Trump the fuel for their fire of hatred and bile against an issue that should have been tackled decades ago. And finally, Donald Trump blaming Antifa, which is anti-fascist, for all the issues that are going on, the anti-fascist movement, and that's who Donald Trump chooses to blame. Well, if he doesn't like the anti-fascists, then what is he?
He's called them a group when there is no in particular organisation known as Antifa, or it's a movement. It's not a group. There's no membership. There's no place where you can join Antifa. It's merely a movement, and that's the name that's come from it.
But it's all the idea of damning the movement, which is about anti-fascism. The issue is with the anti-fascists. Well, if you're being against fascism, the default opinion should be anti-fascism. But so Trump is trying to get people to be against being against fascism. So is he trying to create a fascist state in the US? Evidently so.
So where do you think we go from here? Once the violence is finished and once everything's been cleaned up, I think we need to have a proper discussion on our relationship with race, not only in America, but in this country as well, to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. I think you saw this whole social media presence. Now we've got the whole attention of the whole world on this issue. Now is the time that we need to have a proper discussion, and we understand African Americans' views on it, lawmakers' view on it, and we need a proper discussion to bring about proper change. The only way you're going to bring around proper change is what Killer Mike has said, the rapper from Run the Jewels, who's a prominent activist, and he said, don't release your anger in the streets, release your anger in the voting booth. That's the way you can enforce real change as well. I think that's the way we're only going to get change, is to have a proper discussion on this issue and to actually have people in there to enforce the change.
I think one of the largest steps to take is get rid of Donald Trump. That just seems like a huge sticking point in all this, having a president who is creating so much racial hatred, basically. It will bring it back again.
Calling them thugs, etc., has made the situation far worse.
Yeah.
As it's created an even bigger divide.
Yeah. I don't think this can be tackled under the Trump administration because he's so against the movement. What needs to happen is first a new president, and then there needs to be a long, hard, hugely in-depth retrospective look back on all the cases of every single section of American society, whether it be the police force, employers, or schooling, whatever it might be, of an institutionalized racism.
And we need to look at a proper discussion into the police and their training and proper vetting into disciplinary action, etc. But we also need to look at the federal justice system, because there has not been a single police officer that has been charged with police brutality that has been properly charged with a murder. And you have to look at the federal justice system in that way as well. You have to have a proper find out where the problem is and where it's going wrong.
Every generation gets more and more progressive, and we won't see a devolution. We won't go back. This hopefully should slowly start to die out, but it's not something that you should have to wait for, right? And it's not something you can completely 100% eradicate at the snap of the fingers, but it's something that can certainly have so much energy and time put into it that is incredibly necessary. And so I think that's where you got to go with that. It's just got to be a huge focus.
This issue can only be tackled in the halls of power, in the voting booth, in Congress, in state Congress, in the presidency as well. It can't be fully changed in the streets or on social media.
As much attention as you can draw to a subject, if you've not got the people in power on your side, then what can you do? It's difficult to talk about. So at this point, I'd just like to say it is quite tricky for Will and I to talk about, just because neither of us are experts on racial prejudice in the US or the UK. and it's never something that we are going to experience, and we're very lucky for that, and we shouldn't have to be lucky for it, but that's just the way things are, and it's the way things need to be changed away from. But what I have done, and to help with that change, is in the description I've put some links to some petitions and a few places you could donate to charity that will all help the cause that really does need a lot of attention at the moment. So, Will, we've been recording for what is nearly over an hour and a half. We've been recording for an hour and 42 minutes as I speak, and we've covered 2 news stories. Now for the semi-regular economics segment.
I've actually got an economics story for once.
I know. Will's been doing lots of learning.
Yes.
And he's come back with an economics story. So, Will, would you like to show us?
It's a bit out of date. It's about 2 weeks out of date, but it was the one I could understand the most. So Warren Buffett, the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, probably one of the most well-known investor in the world, and I think he's like the 4th wealthiest man on the planet. At the online conference for Berkshire Hathaway, he announced that he says to people that he doesn't want them to invest in stocks involving travel and tourism. So that's planes, cruise liners, etc. As he says, they are a value trap, which is when a stock goes down so far, like air travel stocks gone down 68%, cruise liners have gone down 77%, and the price is so low that people think it's a killer deal to buy, and they're buying it bargain prices. The problem is, because this is such a new crisis, airlines such as like Virgin have asked the government to lend them so much amount of money just to stay afloat and not go into administration and potentially collapse. Like Virgin have requested the government give them £500 million just to stay afloat. So you look at that, and when air travel becomes more readily available again, yes, they're going to turn a higher profit, but you've got to remember a lot of their profit will have to go into debt. And the debt's that vast, and you also got to remember they've got to pay interest rates on that as well. So they're going to run a ridiculous amount of debt, which means that companies aren't going to be able to turn over any sort of profit over the next how many years. And things have changed so quickly that it's either they take on more debt and more cash flow to keep the business going, or they dilute the share price even more. That's my story.
You could look at the price of oil and just instantly realise, yeah, that's something to invest in. It's super cheap. It probably bounced back. Let's buy some. But when it comes to these companies, it's a bit different. And so the warning comes is basically don't take it for granted that everything's going to bounce back, right? So you could buy loads of cheap stocks in a business and think, sort of put all your eggs in one basket, put all your money onto one company, but it could easily go bust, because this is an industry that will have a long and slow crawl back into its previous glory. And so that's why companies like Rolls-Royce, who are so many staff redundant, now they're not directly linked, because they don't fly people to places, but they make engines for the aeroplanes. And these businesses won't want to buy new aeroplanes if they can barely stay afloat themselves. And so you end up with an industry-wide impact that's taking a toll. And so things...
Then it goes deeper than that. So the people who make the parts for Rolls-Royce aren't getting enough orders because Rolls-Royce doesn't have a job.
Yeah, exactly. And so you end up with, because the whole industry and everything connected to that industry is on a huge slowdown, it's going to take longer to get back up. And so the whole industry is on a balancing on a knife edge. And so whilst it looks like a nice investment, it could all just collapse in on itself. Yeah, well done, Will. My story is about banks and banking. As we all know, the previous financial crisis that we had, as is always referenced by literally anybody ever talking about the economy, the financial crisis is going to come up at some point. The taxpayer bailed out the banks. And so lots of people have said, because this is a crisis that isn't caused from the top down, right? So this isn't banks collapsing, meaning nobody can get any money, and there's no trust in the financial sector. This is more individuals are losing jobs, which means the banks are fine. There's just they can help us rather than us having to help them, basically. And so lots of people are saying, look, this is now the time that the banks can kind of make amends for the taxpayer having to bail them out in the past. Now, the issue with this is it's almost like treating the banks as a public service as opposed to businesses, which is what they are at the end of the day. This would be like me saying, why don't the supermarkets give everybody free food because, people haven't got jobs at the moment. But if you expect the banks to take that sort of role and act as like a public service, just lending out regardless of the risk or not charging for interest rates, or, you hear adverts on the radio of banks saying, look, we're giving these interest-free loans for a certain amount of time because we know everybody's struggling. If you expect that of banks for too long, they'll become unstable, unprofitable and uninvestable. Not only is it really a profitable sector because it makes lots of money for, the amount of people that it employs, it's also really important that everything else sort of depends on it. Because if I wanted to start a business to do with cosmetics and makeup, which is as far away from banking and finance as you could be, I'm still going to have to go to the bank and say, can I have a loan so I can start up my business? Or I'm still going to have to set up a pension scheme or whatever it might be. And so by expecting so much of the bank and making them become public services as opposed to businesses that the public use, you create the instability that is necessary in an economy that's so dependent on the financial sector like ours. Almost in the other way, right? So the banks were lending too much money and taking too much risk in the name of profit back in the previous financial crisis. Instead of this time, the banks driving to make too much profit that's causing them to collapse and have an economic downturn. You would actually end up with the bank not making any profit at all and then collapsing. A society that is so dependent on financial services, not only for the wealth of our economy, but also every society needs a well-performing financial sector if you want other businesses and other parts of society. It's not just businesses, it's people reliant on them to get a mortgage or to buy a car or whatever it might be, a credit card so you can buy things before payday. If these banks fail because we treat them as a public service, not as businesses needing to make money, it can't go well. So that's just a very waffly way of getting about the point, telling everybody how important banks are, which is something you probably didn't need to be told. And so another quick thing I was just going to talk about, you can hear the newspaper there, was foreign investment. Now, because of coronavirus, foreign investment is going to drop dramatically anyway, all across the globe. But recently, a new report came out, which is for the first time since 1997, UK foreign direct investment is not the highest in Europe. Right, so it was the highest in Europe because we speak English. We've got a really strong financial sector. We've got the city of London, right, which is along with New York, is one of the most significant and Singapore financial hubs in the world, right? And so Britain gets loads and loads of investment, but obviously due to Brexit uncertainty, etc., 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 it's now dropped, and France, of all people, have overtaken us. So for all the little Englanders out there who voted for Brexit to make Britain stronger, and now the French have overtaken us, that's quite ironic. Anyway, so my point with that is it's coming at a point where, as we were discussing earlier, the most vulnerable people with the coronavirus are going to take the highest hit because of job losses and being affected and putting themselves most at risk by this. It's also going to be a time when investment, which is needed to level up, as the government is saying, is going to drop dramatically, and especially in areas that need it the most. So a statistic here is 81% of all foreign direct investment took place within 30 kilometres of one of the core cities in Britain. Now, the core cities are Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Nottingham and Sheffield and London. Yeah. Whilst they are up and down the nation, 48.5% of the total foreign direct investment was in London itself. So if it's not in London, it's within a major city and not in the small or even not in the large towns that could do with lots of investment that they're becoming deprived because they might be losing industry, such as manufacturing, because, as we were just saying earlier, maybe it's the air travel industry is closing down. So if you're in an area that's highly dependent on, for example, Derbyshire is highly dependent on Rolls-Royce for jobs because there's a load of manufacturing there.
Isn't also Nissan or is it Toyota? Toyota, they said they're going to pull out as well.
Exactly. The areas that are going to need the most levelling up are the areas that are going to have the most drawn out of them because of all of this. And so I just thought it was something worth pointing, that not only is investment being drawn out of Britain because of the crisis, but the areas that will still be getting it aren't the areas that need it. The government, their aim was to make Britain, a fair society for everybody and level up the areas and northern powerhouse as they've been going on for the past 10 years. It's now just getting more and more difficult. That was meant to be a short thing and ended up with me waffling on, but what could you expect?
As usual.
Exactly. So that's a little bit of economics for you. In short, don't buy shares in airlines. Don't treat banks like the financial NHS. And good luck to you if you live in Derbyshire. That's the 3 points we've taken away from our economics section this week.
Worst news story.
Yeah, you go, Will, because I don't really have one.
So my article comes from Forbes and a load of tabloid rubbish as well. Kylie Jenner. So she was thought to be the youngest billionaire in the world, but apparently she's not a billionaire because she sold off stock to a share of the company. But I don't care that she is or isn't. There are more important issues that we've talked about today than Kylie Jenner is she lost so many million. It's still a lot of money that she's got. More than probably me and you will ever have in our life.
Definitely not probably will.
I don't care about Kylie Jenner. Can we please move on? That's my story of the week.
This week, I hate to admit it to you guys, I've not really been checking up on The Guardian every day. I know, how have I been living? I mean, isn't that what we all need to do to keep ourselves alive? And when I did check today, there was nothing really that either riled me up or I thought was praiseworthy. And so my worst article of the week is more a quote. And I heard it on the radio today. It was a bit crazy. Now, it's going back to the protesters. And the quote is, "This city belongs to black people, so we have every right to burn it down if we want to." That's just mad, really, isn't it? So it's about the rioters. And so the city in question was, I think it was Minneapolis. And the point is, we are protesting for black rights. And this is, a predominantly black city. So why can't we tear it down? The protests are really important and necessary, and it's an issue that needs speaking out on. But having the idea that because you're the same race as most people in the city and you're all protesting, so that gives you the idea that you can just smash the whole place up. And so I just thought that was a really bad attitude to have about the protest. So again, usual installment here of a game. In our first podcast episode, so after 5, we are returning to the game. What's it called, Will? Is it?
We just call it the Trump quote game.
The Trump quote game. You've got to decide whether something is a quote said by Trump, and it's got to be a direct quote, or if it is fake news. So, Will, are you ready? And I'll get guessing. Will has the cards with him.
Should we go for 12 again?
We'll go for 12. If you couldn't already tell,
let's go. My fingers are long and beautiful, as it has been well documented, and various other parts of my body.
Fake news.
True.
What?
Remember, he's dead insecure about his hands.
Yeah, but I didn't think he'd call them long and beautiful.
Yeah.
Bloody hell. I thought he'd just kind of ignore.
Do you want me to do the accent? My fingers are long and beautiful, as it has been well documented, and various other parts of my body.
Next quote.
I look very much forward to showing my financials, because they are huge.
Was that people wanting to see his financial records to make sure he was all above board? I'm going to say true, but it's probably fake news.
Ding, 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 ding. It's true.
Oh, good.
I've been running from president for so long, and I'm now frankly not sure I even want to be president of a failing country.
Oh, God, please tell me that's fake news.
Which one are you going for?
MAGA, make America great again, failing country. No, I'm still going to say fake news.
It's correct.
Thank God. So, right, I'm on 2 out of 3, which is much better than I did last time.
You only got 4 last time. I'm the most successful person in this country. You will be a moron not to vote for me.
That's got to be fake news.
It's fake news.
Oh, thank God. Because he's not the most successful person in the country, and even he couldn't believe that.
3 out of 4. You know well. Why can't we use nuclear weapons?
True.
It's true. All the women on The Apprentice flirted with me. All the women on The Apprentice flirted with me, consciously or unconsciously. That's to be expected.
True.
It's true. Mate, you're banging this today.
Who's this?
Yeah, New James, who's this?
No. Okay, doesn't matter.
I completely missed out on that joke then.
Sorry. What am I on now? How I've only got 1 wrong. How many have I done?
5 out of 6.
Oh, brilliant.
The Japanese Prime Minister invited me for dinner last week. The sushi was terrific.
Would Japanese was it Prime Minister, President, whatever it was, invite him? I don't know. Trump's not very sophisticated. I don't know if he'd like sushi or not, but I'm still going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say true. He's much more of a burger and chips kind of guy.
Big Mac. I think I'm actually humble.
True.
It is true.
What am I on now? 6 out of 8. Get in.
I am happy to take advice from China, as long as it's on how to build a wall.
See, I think I've seen that somewhere on the internet.
It's fake news, apparently.
Okay, fair
6
enough.
out of 9. That's a dead famous one. I can't do that one.
Go on.
So I've said if Ivanka wasn't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.
Oh yeah, that is disgusting.
Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger did a really bad job as governor of California, and an even worse one on The Apprentice.
Was Arnie on The Apprentice?
Yeah, once Trump left to be president, Arnie took over as The Apprentice.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. See, in Britain, they have actually competent businessmen running it in Alan Sugar, rather than an actor and a caricature businessman.
Which one's which?
Oh, hey, good stuff there, mate. Top joke for the pod there. Yeah, he's bitter. True.
True! So he's on 7 out of 10. 2 more to go. Any negative polls are fake news, just like the CNN polls in the election.
Can you really denounce a poll? I guess you can. Send them back to where they came from. Little joke there. See, it's difficult to completely ignore a poll, because even if it's slightly inaccurate, he mentioned CNN, which is likely to do for Trump, but these are written by people who know Trump very well, but I'm still going to say true anyway.
It's true! 8
Get
out
in.
of 11. We enter the final question. I think the only difference between me and the other candidates is that I'm more honest and my women are more beautiful. Firstly, that's 2 different things.
Okay, he does try and claim to be honest because he's like the anti-politician. And this is 2016 election because he's talking about other candidates. I'm going to guess and say true, but I'm not really feeling it.
Drum roll, please.
Oh, don't.
It's true! Ding, 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 ding. James, you scored 9 out of 12.
That's a win if you ask me. That's 75%. I'll take that. That's the highest score we've had so far in any game.
Shall we call it a day, James?
Well, we could call it an hour or a morning or an evening or a night or a second. But it's certainly call it the end of the podcast, Will.
What have we come to? Anyway, thank you very much for listening to Something Near the Centre.
You're doing the outro today, Will. Sorry, I didn't know.
I can do the outro if you want to.
I didn't know we'd arranged for you to take over this, Will.
Fine. Take over, Ian.
No. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much for listening to Something Near the Centre, a politics about politics.
Quick warning if you're wearing headphones.
This is why I do the outro!
Give me a go. Just give me a go. Thank you very much for listening to Something Near the Centre, a podcast about politics, economics and current events. I've been Will.
And I've been James.
So thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
See you again soon. Well done on your first outro, Will. You've done really well there.
So next week, I'm on the intro.
I'll think about that. Who paid for the microphone? No, I'm joking. Do the intro. Do whatever you like. You have been listening to Something Near the Centre. The podcast was presented by Will Turner and James Baker, and edited by me, James Baker. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.